The Sixers just lost a series they had absolutely no excuse to lose versus the Boston Celtics. Now, don't get me wrong, I did have Boston winning originally, but Philly had them on their back foot and then some. Game 6 should have closed the series, but instead they blew the lead. And in Game 7, both of their star players did not show up. Now, there's stuff to say about James Harden because of the outcome of this series, sure, but it's stuff that's been said before. But after winning MVP and immediately flaming out in the second round, I feel like people are ready to have some honest discussions about Joel Embiid. Let's get into it. Real quick before I get into this video is sponsored by my podcast. Go check it out if you have not already. It is hosted by me, another NBA YouTuber named Alex Hoops, who makes excellent content, as well as the editor of this channel, who you all seem to like more than me, which is Rudy. It's one of my favorite things that I do, and I would like to get more eyes on it, so if you haven't watched it already, I would appreciate it if you checked it out. There is going to be a live stream every Thursday at 4:30 from pretty much here on out if we stick to that, so yeah. Go check it out, link in the description, all that. Joel Embiid has yet to win a second round series, meaning that pretty much every team that he and the Sixers have ever beaten was a team that was a lower seed and was expected to lose to the Sixers. Taking a look at the Sixers' playoff history the last few years, the best team they beat was the 2022 Toronto Raptors, a team that won 48 games. Outside of that, they beat the Nets this year, a 45-win rebuilding team that only had those wins because of the previous regime there. So the roster wasn't really a 45-win team, but it technically was. They beat a 38-win Wizards team in 2021, a 42-win team in 2019, a 44-win Heat team in 2018. The average wins for a team the Sixers have beat in the playoffs in Embiid's tenure is 43 wins, 2 games over 500. It's not a very impressive track record, but if I'm just going to be a little bit charitable to Embiid and the 76ers, to be fair, they have faced some pretty impressive second-round opponents. The Celtics on paper were the second best team in the league last year. They played like they were trying to lose and still managed to win, so I still consider it an inexcusable loss, but at least it's a tough team on paper. Then they had a 53-win Jimmy Butler-led Miami Heat team that came 1 game short of the finals, a 58-win Kawhi Leonard Toronto Raptors team that ended up winning the championship, and a 55-win, but albeit hobbled Boston Celtics team, but one that prevailed in spite of that. I'm of course talking about the year where Kyrie Irving and Gordon Hayward were hurt, and then like a rookie Jason Tatum, second-year Jaylen Brown, and Al Horford and Terry Rozier, that whole team. I won't pretend like that team's bad just because of the names and the context. They well exceeded how good they were supposed to be. But either way, I'd say pretty good second-round opponents through and through. Now this year, and of course versus Atlanta, there's just simply no excuse. Now I do want to throw out there before I get to the truth about Embiid, it's just a dramatic title, but whatever. Before I get to that, I do want to say that I am aware that Embiid played in this series versus the Celtics somewhat hobbled. He played through an injury that if he were to get surgery on it would have put him out for a few weeks. Now that's not necessarily indicative of just truly how affecting that injury is on him, but it, definitely noteworthy. And I'd say in Game 2 and for stretches of Game 7, Joel Embiid definitely looked like he was not his best physically. However, the thing is with Embiid, the injury excuse exists in practically every series he has ever lost. So at a certain point, if you are always injured, then that's just the player that you are. That's not me blaming Embiid because that's not something that's really his fault. Sure, there are things you can do to prevent injury, and maybe the fact that he likes to flop like a fish every time someone who weighs over 100 pounds touches him probably isn't helping his injury stuff. But in general, I'm not blaming Embiid for these deficiencies, but we also can't sit here and pretend like they don't exist. So yes, you can still critique the play of someone who's injured if they're only ever playing injured. So with that said, the biggest problem to me for Joel Embiid is pressure, and that is in both the literal sense and the metaphysical sense. Now, in the physical sense, I'm pretty much just referring to how he responds to pressure from the defense. Whenever he plays a good defense that knows how to bring two to the ball without leaving open some obvious weakness, they will swarm him, and he pretty much only seems to panic. Really, there are one of 5 possible outcomes whenever Joel Embiid gets double teamed. Now, there are some of the positive ones, which is he shoots it anyway and either scores or is fouled or, just misses the shot. He tries to pass it out, and that results in a bucket, like James Harden's game winner in Game 4, for example. But on the negative end, he tries to pass it out, and it's turned over. He tries to pass it out, and said pass doesn't really take advantage of the fact the opposition is playing 3-on-4, and it just ends up resulting in wasting shot clock. Or he just straight up loses it from the initial pressure. Not to make this about Embiid versus Jokic, but it's a pretty useful the dichotomy between these two players to describe this. To me, the biggest fundamental difference between Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic is how they respond to pressure from the defense. This is the reason I have always felt that Nikola Jokic was the better player. Embiid usually panics and either makes a play that burns clock, takes a bad shot, or just straight up turns it over. With Nikola Jokic, if you bring two to the ball, he will find the open man without fail practically every single time. Because of that fact with Jokic, it enables him to be a much more effective post player. While it did come in a loss, when Jokic had 53 points in Game 3 versus the Phoenix Suns, that was because he pretty much exclusively got one-on-one matchups. And that's not because Nikola Jokic can be defended one-on-one really, as evidenced by the 53 points, but it's because if you try to bring two to the ball against him, he's going to get the open man a good look. He just simply will. Because of this fact with Jokic, it often enables him to only have to worry about single coverage, which makes him the more effective post player. And the thing about that is that Jokic posting up is a very efficient and good play because he's the best post-up player in the entire NBA. Now, posting up is actually something that's kind of seen somewhat of a resurgence in the modern era due to these two players, but it's important to remember that posting up in the modern context is quite a bit different from posting up in the context of previous eras, like the golden age of bigs in the 90s for centers, and even the early 2000s when it was Duncan and KG and stuff like that. Either way, back then, illegal defense was a thing. You really had to commit to bringing help if you were going to bring help, so very often, really strong post players only ever dealt with single coverage. It's really the main reason why Karl Malone and the Utah Jazz were so successful for so long, and just since I mentioned his name, fuck that guy, but moving on. In the modern era, there's pretty much always going to be a second defender lurking, ready to take swipes at the ball and ready to bring help when 100% necessary. Look at how the Celtics closed out this series. They started Robert Williams. They had him guard PJ Tucker, as in not guard him at all. And whenever Embiid tried to make a move in the post, Robert was there to bring help defense. As a post-up player in 2023, you need to be able to have a level head and respond to the pressure of the defense very well. And I don't think that Embiid does that. I don't expect him to do it as well as Nikola Jokic does, because that is an obscene standard to hold anybody to. But he could still be a lot better at it than he is. And it is because of this issue that it is a lot easier to stop Joel Embiid than it is Nikola Jokic, which is why Jokic is the better player. But let's move on to the second pillar here. The other important thing of note is that, like his co-star James Harden, he does not show up in elimination games. This year versus Boston, 15 points on 18 shots, 20 points on 24 shots versus Miami last year in that game 6. He had 31 won versus Atlanta on good efficiency, but well, I wasn't really blaming him for that game in particular anyways because of, well, you know who. In Game 7 versus the Raptors, he had 21 points on 6 for 18 shooting, and it seems to get especially bad when the opposition is rallying and they have momentum. He just simply disappears in the biggest moments of the biggest games. In Game 6 versus Boston, when the Celtics started to go on the run that would eventually win them the game, in the last 6 minutes of the fourth quarter, not only did Embiid not score a single time, he only put up 2 shots, and neither of them were good shots. This is not the kind of play you expect out of a superstar player in these moments. This is not the kind of play you expect out of an MVP. Joel Embiid has wanted this MVP award for a long time and made that very explicitly clear. And to be fair, I was a little too critical of him for that. I don't really agree with my point about that in the past, but what Embiid is learning is that this MVP award, the MVP award in general, is a double-edged sword. It's the same reason why Nikola Jokic was getting criticism for not beating contending teams with Will Barton being his second best player. There is a standard you are expected to meet when you have been declared the level of player worthy of an MVP award, and Embiid did not meet that standard at all in this series. And based on his track record, I do genuinely worry if he will ever be able to do it. But he still has time. He's only about 30 years old. He can definitely turn this ship around and end his career on a very winning note. But the clock is ticking, and there's only so many times that this team can lose in the fashion that it has, and Embiid just get away with it without any level of criticism. And I think that's why he's finally getting a lot of criticism. But yeah, shout out to Rudy for editing this video, and goodbye. Motherfucker, you better not be out of focus.